I just moderated one panel right before this, and I'm happy to do this one right now, especially with this late addition to the panel. Joe, hi. Thank you for joining. Yeah.
Nice to be here.
Thank you so much. So excited to dive into everything that Colossal Biosciences is doing. So, Ben, I'd love to start with you, because I don't know, how many people are familiar with Colossal Biosciences? This is, no.
Very good.
I love this.
That's right.
Get ready for this. So here's the thing. Ben, take us through the origin of Colossal, because you guys are doing some really cool stuff.
Yeah, so if you don't know what Colossal is, it's the world's first de-extinction and species preservation company. So, and it all started, it's really the brainchild of George Church, right? And so George is, if you don't know George, he's the father of synthetic biology, smartest person. A lot of the read-write technologies that we think about and use every day for human healthcare was invented by George. And I actually called George as an entrepreneur. I wanted to build a company in genomics. I called him. I didn't think I wanted to build this company in genomics. I thought I wanted to build a genetics software company, and was reaching out to George, and within 5 minutes he answered my question, and I just said, George, if you had one project with unlimited capital, what would you do? And he said, I'd work to bring back woolly mammoths, reintroduce them into the Arctic, help suppress carbon and methane in the ecosystem, and make technologies for human healthcare and also for conservation.
Right. And that's the thing. So, I mean, you had a very successful career in tech. I mean, you had like 5 companies that you started and then, sold. So you said that this was not exactly the company that you were thinking of starting. So what appealed to you about this? Like, why this company?
Well, I feel like as a tech entrepreneur, I saw a couple of people from Inc. that I feel bad, because I've actually said this to them in previous interviews. As a tech entrepreneur, we kind of get notorious for saying, I want to do this to change the world. But most companies just get bought, or they go public, or they go out of business, right? That's like the traditional trajectory. And this was, I feel like George put an opportunity that if we are successful, could create a lot of value, could inspire people, and also could make a pretty big impact.
Yeah. And so when did Colossal get on your radar, Joe? Like,
Well, I've had a lifelong fascination with biology, genetics, and specifically into the field of epigenetics. My great-grandmother survived the Armenian genocide. 8 of her children were murdered in front of her, and the 9th died in her escape across the Euphrates River. She was then put into a camp and impregnated by a German officer who was invited to the Ottoman Turkish Empire during World War I. The officer left her in the camp to give birth to my grandmother by herself. And my grandmother spent half of her life battling a host of autoimmune conditions that we now know, if anybody's like familiar with the works of Dr. Gabor Mate, this idea that DNA can be stamped by trauma, by tragedy. And this has also been proven through experiments with, I don't know if anybody knows about like the rats and the cherry blossoms, where they will negatively reinforce rats by the scent of cherry blossoms, so that when they give birth to offspring, and those offspring give birth to their offspring, even if they have never even come in contact with a cherry blossom, they'll show fear towards the generational trauma can be imprinted through the genetics. And so this has become really and truly like my life's mission, is trying to understand that and find a way to bring an end to it, because Western medicine hasn't been able to figure it out with chemicals. And so I get introduced to Ben. And I'm introduced, and somebody says, oh, well, it's the real life Jurassic Park. Right. Okay, and I'm like, well, I'm in. But what I found was that was only the tip of the iceberg.
Right.
It's, okay, when are we bringing the dinosaurs back, Ben? And haven't you seen the end of the movie? And don't you know what happens? But what I realize is there's a giant iceberg below the water's surface, which gets into everything from, I know we're like pressed for time, so I'm just, the highlights are longevity. Human beings can have unlimited life potential and unlimited quality of life, the eradication of all genetic disorder, clean drinkable water, unlimited supply.
Plastics.
Plastics can be reversed with microscopic organisms that can eat all of the plastic in the world. This is happening right now. The end of cancer, the ability of an octopus to alter its own genetic structure with its RNA. Once we start unlocking that within animals, and especially animals, DNA holds, it's storage for information. Mm-hmm. And as, we continue to erode our own environment, we're losing a lot of that information, whether it be plant or animal. And it's very important right now, the work that Ben and Colossal are doing to collect all of that data and have that data, because there are clues within genetic information as to eradicating all disease and really all of the ills of man.
Right.
So, yeah.
And that's the thing. No, that's amazing, and that's what I was going to ask, because I know you're starting with the headlines are de-extinction. You're bringing back the dodo and the woolly
People
mammoth,
really just want to talk about like the mammoth and the extinction.
Right.
And we actually have more conservation and research projects going on than we actually do de-extinction projects.
Right.
But we it's funny. We show the world a woolly mouse. It breaks the internet.
Have you seen the woolly mouse?
It's adorable.
It was on Saturday Night Live. There's a woolly mouse. It's an animal that's never existed on planet. A woolly mouse that has been created. Sorry, I just had to jump in for people that don't know.
And we made it in 30 days. So
As one does.
Yeah, as one does. Well, and it shows that our precision editing and the results of our precision editing work, and they work the first time. And then we also screen all those cells with monoclonal screening to ensure, and sequencing to ensure that they are only healthy. Right. So, and so we did that. Our shows that our de-extinction pipeline, our species preservation pipeline works the first time, which is pretty cool. But even just to Joe's point,
which is important from an ethics standpoint.
Yeah. So that we're not like making weird mice. We're trying to be. I mean, I guess woolly mice are kind of weird.
But there's an amount of respect of life forms.
Yeah,
where if this technology
exactly.
was in the wrong hands, you'd be getting.
You get really weird stuff.
Yeah.
But to Joe's point, most diseases are multigenic in nature, meaning that they actually are multiple genes that cause that disease state, right? And so the more we understand about epigenetics, the more we understand about genome engineering, we are actually able to deliver more multiplex edits with a high degree of precision and with very little off-target effects. We're probably arguably the most advanced synthetic biology company on the planet, and that will directly relate to how we address some of these disease states in humans.
Sure. So my question on that point is, how do you think a company like Colossal stacks up against, say, CRISPR Therapeutics, like a company that is came onto the scene specifically targeting humans, and then you're kind of not working your way backwards, but you came onto the scene talking about de-extinction. So my thing is, how do you see that fitting into the competitors out there?
So, and I don't think I think CRISPR Therapeutics is great. We don't consider ourselves a therapeutics company. Most of the genome engineering companies like CRISPR Therapeutics are designing drugs, they're designing tools, taking them to market and whatnot. But I would argue that the average person they're never going to be on Saturday Night Live. And not to be mean, but it's how do we inspire the next generation of kids, right? How do we get people excited about science? And so while we aren't focusing on therapeutics, we're focusing on kind of the entire systems model of de-extinction so that we can help save species. Because we're going to lose up to 50% of all biodiversity between now and 2050 if we don't do anything about it. The technologies we have don't work. They don't work at the speed at which we're eradicating species and changing the planet. So we need a systems model. And CRISPR Therapeutics and others, they're great point solutions for a particular type of drug, right? We aren't trying to solve XYZ in this human genome or develop this drug. We're trying to build a system where we can understand genomes, to Joe's point, we can engineer it precisely, and we can screen it so it's healthy, whether that's a cell in a human body or whether that's a woolly mouse or whether that's a Tasmanian tiger. We want to be indifferent to, right? So we're coming at it from a systems perspective, and then there's a halo effect that it helps conservation and inspires kids. So we're very happy about the CRISPR Therapeutics of the world. We're just not a drug therapy company.
Sure.
But rising tides raise all ships.
Absolutely.
So and we're really at this quickening right now, and I think some of that has to do with AI, that AI being used for positive applications, obviously to put together the possibilities, and obviously from an ethical standpoint, like Ben's saying, I think there are, like when stem cell research started happening, there was this idea of playing God, and really, if you look at it from the flip side of that coin, it would be unethical to not pursue this type of science, to not try to preserve and understand the ecosystems that are being destroyed and what needs to be replaced. You think about farm to table, right? And how Dan Barber figured out, what on a farm, what pieces of land need to have what animals in what order. He was understanding the environment in order to create more nutrient-dense foods for us to eat. And the same thing works for the rest of the planet. So the research that's being done is also, it's how to have us use technology to then make a stronger bond and kind of like bring us back to a communion with nature.
Yep. Yep. And on the point of nature, I know that one thing that Colossal is thinking about is like restoring these ecosystems and like creating more biodiversity, but you're up against one hell of a clock with like the climate crisis. So you're here, and this is obviously something that we're not going to see the effects of what you're doing in this space for quite some time. So how are you building this technology knowing that there is this massive existential crisis happening with the climate, when knowing if this does come to fruition, it could be all for naught?
Well, we see ecosystems actually repair pretty quickly, and we see species bounce back pretty quickly. Like if everyone looks at kind of all the modeling that came out of COVID in terms of like how we see rebound occur, we even see small populations with low genetic diversity rebound quickly. If we can give them more genetic diversity, they go faster. And this is kind of where our conservation partners in it are. Like Colossal is not the silver bullet. We want to be one thread of a much larger tapestry of technologies that people can go use to actually bring back species or save other species. So we have about 48 conservation partners. In addition to our core business, we actually launched a foundation. We raised $50 million for, which we're really excited about. And we are just funding as many people, as long as they open source the technologies for conservation, we are funding their new crazy ideas to help save species. And we hope there's 1,000 of these type companies and initiatives out there to help save species. Because what we do know is that that rewilding works, and when we put animals back into their natural habitats, specifically keystone species, predators, large herbivores, and omnivores, it actually creates this kind of trickle-down effect where the ecosystem then spawns with better carbon sequestration, better methane suppression, more fauna, more flora, and we've seen this time and time again work with everything with rewilding bears in Europe all the way to rewilding wolves in Yellowstone.
Yeah, and there's two things in what you were saying that caught me, which is one, what Ben is talking about, which is quality of life while we're here, and also rewilding and the benefits quickly that happen within an ecosystem, but also there's an end game, right? Not only are you going to release a woolly mammoth into the Arctic, which could actually help stop carbon emissions from the decomposition of the flora under the ice. So by re-releasing these animals, their migration patterns are going to pack the ice down and stop global warming, or at least slow global warming down. But then when you talk about endgame, whatever is going to happen to the planet, okay, if you talk about longevity, and it's believed that human beings could have an unlimited lifespan.
Yeah, I mean, we're pretty close to, not Colossal, but humanity is pretty close to longevity escape velocity, where we're adding 1.1 years of every single year that we're alive. And then except for like getting hit by a car, jumping off a building, we're not immortal. But, we could, increase our lives indefinitely.
But like somewhere in the mid-2040s or sooner, for every year that you live, you'll de-age 1.1 years. Okay? So if you do the math, we could outkick our resources. Or the resources could end before that, or the sun could expand, or whatever it is the fate of this planet. What needs to happen is what happened in Scandinavia with the seed banks, where they were collecting all of the seeds of all of the plants on the entire planet and storing them.
That does not exist for animals.
Oh. It does not exist for animals. So there's a need to go out and collect all of the genetic information for the planet so that we have all of this, so that, like you said, whatever calamity could happen, we live on in whatever environment is the healthiest for us.
Sure. So what's the revenue model for a company like this? Because I know,
we burn a lot of money forever.
Sure.
We save the world and someone gives us money.
We have a valuation of like 10.2 billion, but
our last valuation was 10.2 billion. So our last public valuation was 10.2 billion. So there's a couple of things. One, the technologies, right? So we've spun out 3 companies, 2 of which we've announced. One is a therapeutics company that we spun out, Form Bio. It's doing quite well. We spun out a second company called Breaking, which is actually, we supercharged, Joe mentioned this a little bit, we supercharged a microbe that was found in the Amazon that kind of started to break down plastic. We use computational biology and synthetic biology to make it where it can eat any type of plastic that we throw at it. And it actually doesn't make smaller pieces of plastic, which suck. It actually makes, it actually breaks the chemical bonds and just creates biomass as kind of the alternative. So we spun that out. We spun out another company that we haven't announced yet. And so there's a lot of option value in the technology stack that we're developing, and as I mentioned, including genetic engineering, right? So we are arguably the best multiplex editing company in the world, where we are editing the most amount of sites on the loci at the highest degree of coverage as possible, with the fewest unintended consequence, meaning that exactly what we planned for is exactly what we got. And then long term, to Joe's point, there's actually huge money in rewilding. There's biodiversity credits, there's carbon credits. Everyone like Lloyd's of London and PwC and everyone's looking at kind of this trend towards a $2.7 trillion nature credit model. So actually preserving and sequestering carbon and making ecosystems more abundant is actually leading to long-term annuities. I mean, we'll make billions of dollars in ARR on just rewilded animals.
Well, yeah, rewilding and going to visit those animals.
Yes, and we'll do ecotourism. We'll work with one of the things I was on I was on the phone with the Minister of Culture and the Minister of Tourism from Mauritius, right? Oh, nice. And they were just so excited about it. They were so excited about rewilding the dodo. And part of their thing was, you are going to triple our GDP. And so we say, how do we do that? How do we bring in content? How do we bring educational content to kids? How do we make, if you can't afford to go there, how do we bring content, from Mauritius into your living room so that you can see it? So we're not watching fake ice ages and fake Jurassic Parks. How do we actually educate people on these rewilding initiatives of both extant species and extinct species?
Yeah. Right. And I mean, I know we're talking about money. The question was about money, but there's also, it's inspiring the next generation of kids to want to do something meaningful. If I was a kid and I knew there was a laboratory where I could go and visit an animal that's never been on the planet, right, or I got to go to the lab and participate in piercing the wall of an Asian elephant egg.
Now you tell me about that.
And with a laser, with a laser, and injecting it with woolly mammoth DNA. And then, of course, having the explanation of how the thylacine, the marsupial Tasmanian tiger, there's not a complete strain of DNA. So there had to be different sources. Its closest living relative is basically like a marsupial mouse, a Dunnart. Okay, and that's the closest living relative that they could pull DNA from. Right. And then there's a descendant of it, this wolf, that has the same skull structure, except one minor variation that if you know where the variation is, then you can get the skull without the variation. So and then of course existing thylacine DNA, you're combining those three, and then there's an electrical charge that happens.
It's crazy.
Which is the charge of life, which has been figured out scientifically.
Yeah, it's crazy. We actually deconstruct, and then we put in these guides and we reconstruct these guides and actually deliver the DNA, and also using electrophoresis.
Yeah. So I was standing there and my mind was completely blown. And I want to drop everything I'm doing now and go work it.
You did, yeah. We actually, he's not joking. We talk all the time. He's massive. We very fortunately, we've got a lot of great investors, sure, but Joe is an investor in the business, and he's massively passionate about the business, asks great questions, and you actually did crush it when you did that somatic cell nuclear transfer. So
hey, if you need somebody to work weekends at the lab, I'm available.
Clearly,
the most expensive overtime.
I know. Right? So I'm curious. I want to go back to the de-extinction efforts for a little bit, because we talked about the woolly mouse, and it made a lot of headlines, obviously. But I know
broke the internet.
I remember
Saturday Night Live.
I know. So the thing is, there's a genome engineer who said, quote, "It's far away from making a mammoth or a mammoth mouse. It's just a mouse that has some special genes." And so I think there's some people that will look at this and be like, well, how much progress is this? So I'd love to, if you can just explain a little bit about where you are now in this roadmap of de-extinction.
Yeah, so we try to, it's not our job to persuade anyone. It's our job to educate them and be transparent, especially when you do something this big and bold. I don't know who said that, but what's interesting is that the delivery mechanism of delivering edits sequentially has been figured out, right? A lot of them lead to off-target effects. They have about 15% efficiency. There's not a lot of people that have delivered 8 edits across 7 genes at once and gone through the entire cloning process or microinjection in embryos and achieved 100% of healthy animals from that, where the edits were exactly what you want with zero unintended consequences. That's really hard. So we're stacking things that get exponentially hard. Joe talked about the thylacine. Well, we've actually already done 300 edits on the thylacine. No one's ever done anything like that where it's all over the genome. And so just the genetic engineering of the mouse, while it's a mouse, it's a marvel of science in terms of where we are from an innovation perspective. But it's not the first step, and I think this is where a lot of people have got it wrong. This is a validation step. We've been editing immortalized Asian elephant cells for the last 2.5 years in our lab, using about 85 gene targets that we've discovered across 59 mammoth genomes, ranging from 3,500 years to 1.2 million years old. So we've been editing mammoth genes literally for 2.5 years. But your choices are, you can make that animal, which goes back to the ethics. Probably shouldn't do that until you know for sure. You can actually create organoids, but you have to have induced pluripotent stem cells, which no one had ever done. People worked on it for 15 years before we did. 18 months later, we have iPSCs. And then we've actually been able to differentiate those into tissue culture, where we're growing edited Asian elephant cells with mammoth hair. And so that's great, but that's still not a living animal. Right. So then what we decided to do is take this entire pipeline, apply it to mice, and within 30 days, we had mice that were born.
Okay, that's incredibly fascinating. And so I know, honestly.
Yeah. So it is slightly more than a couple of edits in a mouse.
No, of course, no. And I think that, I want to go back to the broader implications of what you're doing, because I know that there are, I was reading an article saying that there could be possibly what you're building could have effects in like IVF, for example. And so I just want to if you can give like the full scope of what you could possibly
build out the scope, like IVF is one that's pretty interesting. I just went through IVF. I have my first kid. He's 9 months old. He's amazing and weird. He has no idea what he's in for. Like, I show him
with
stuff like
Dad, it's gonna be a ride, man.
This kid's life weird. He's like, can I go back and try the birth lottery again? But he's awesome. But the IVF process mostly works off of like a morphological grading, right? Like very few people are even doing full.
Talk to me like I'm dumb.
Okay.
I'm not, but
So where do babies come from? Okay, so
the stork.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, a super handsy stork. So that's your mailman. So so what's interesting though is like once you get an embryo, right, and you're doing IVF, like your in vitro fertilization, if you're doing it through this process versus natural pregnancy, a lot of times they look at that and say, how does it look? Based on how old is it, right? And so they have like a scale that's kind of old school, right? They're not using AI or computer vision. They're like, it kind of looks like this. We should put it in. And unfortunately, a lot of women go through this process where they lose pregnancies because a lot of those embryos aren't even compatible with life. They have genetic defects that while they look really good, they're not the best genetically that are most compatible with life. And so what we've been doing at Colossal is we've been doing next-gen sequencing as well as to build our long-term artificial wombs for our species, because all of our animals will be born first generation through surrogates, but long-term, we want them actually to be born through artificial wombs. That's how you grow 1,000 mammoths at once in artificial wombs, right? Or 200.
Like you've got 2 white rhino females.
Exactly.
And how do you create genetic diversity within a species? For example, cheetahs were being wiped out by a version of the coronavirus because there was no genetic variation within them. They were all derived from, the flood that happened 11,600 years ago. After that flood, there was either one pregnant cheetah or a male and a female, and that's it. And so all cheetahs were derived from that one mother. And once you entered in a killer virus, it was over. And so that's something that's happening in real time. So Ben's talking about, artificial wombs. It's a way to repopulate the wild. It's also a way to eradicate genetic disease.
And even before we get to full stage artificial wombs, just the Lego blocks of like hydrogels and microfluidics and computer vision, all these technologies that we're using to keep embryos alive longer so that we can study them so that they're healthier before we put them in our version of an artificial womb that we're working on. Just that Lego block could be helpful in IVF clinics around the world so that they could actually understand and grow those embryos a little bit further to make sure they are compatible with life, do sequencing on those embryos that doesn't hurt the embryos, so that when potential moms put them in, there's a higher rate of pregnancy.
There's so much understanding that's falling off the table. You know, that's helping in all, like I said, all, you know, the rising tides raise all ships. You know, this research, you know, like I said, it's to just say, oh, it's the modern day Jurassic Park. Like, yeah, sure. But there's all of, like, the journey to get there. There are so many pieces of the puzzle to our own existence on this planet that get unlocked. And it's happening every day.
And it's much closer than I think people realize.
And so, in all of that, how are you thinking about making sure that this technology that's spinning out of Colossal is accessible to everyone?
Yeah.
Right. Well, and also, I mean, there's a bit of a Manhattan Project to it as well, in that you want to make sure that it's in the hands of people that are going to handle it ethically.
Sure.
Yeah, like the U.S. government's an investor, which we're very public about it. The U.S. is an investor in the business. We meet with different parts of the United States government every quarter to disclose a lot of data, talk about our adversaries, all kinds of stuff. But to your question, you know, all of the technologies like Form Bio, right? Form Bio that we spun out, it's a computational biology platform helping drugs go to market faster and figuring out when drugs that could help save someone for pharma, like they're not making their own drugs, they're working with pharma and they're working with biotechs, and they're actually helping accelerate the time to drugs, which saves pharma money, but it also gets, you know, really important healing therapeutics to market faster, right? And so we at Colossal aren't, or even Form Bio, aren't responsible for the pricing and how do we make it accessible. But, you know, like this component for IVF, you know, we're talking about, do we spin that out or do we just go license that to, you know, 1,000 different IVF clinics so people can use it?
Right. And so I know, Ben, you have a history of building these companies and then, you know, them getting acquired. So do you think that this is something you're going to stick with? Like, what's your future with Colossal?
I have really bad ADD. And so this is interesting enough with enough components that keeps me busy. So I work 7 days a week on it, and I'm never bored.
Fair enough. So knowing that there's all these components that we talked about, like what would you say is your primary focus at Colossal right now?
So I have only one focus, which is bringing in the right team and supporting them. I'm a support function, right? So my job is to bring in like the best Shapiros, the George Churches, the Lou Vidalins, the Andrew Pass, the Sarah Ords, all of these different folks, and empower them, make sure they have the money they need, the most state-of-the-art technology, lasers, everybody, you know, and Joe working overtime. So I just want to be there to give everybody what they need.
Yeah, and to that point, I mean, who are you as a leader? Because we're talking about, we kind of sped through all the things that you're working on, but I'm curious. I mean, this is a fast company, obviously talk about business and leadership, and I'm curious to know from you, like, how are you sort of leading this company that has all these tentacles, so to speak?
Well, I think of it like a sport, right? Like entrepreneurship is a team sport. It doesn't often get shown that way in the press, right? It's like it's all his fault, it's all her fault, or it's all his praise, or it's all her praise. But entrepreneurship is a team sport, right? And so your job is to build the best team and work with the best people and help lift them up and empower them, make them practice. You need to be the first on the field, last off the field, and that's what I try to do. I try to lead by example in that regard. But, you know, for us, we were trying to do something insanely hard that no one's ever done, that's like moon landing level shit, and we're trying to do it in a couple years.
Yeah. And so, Joe, for you, I mean, how visible are you in your support of Colossal? Because I feel like it's one of those things where it's like, this doesn't feel like
he's
any
right
sort of,
here.
I know that.
Yeah.
But
Showed up. He had other things to do, and then I said, hey, do you want to go to this fast guy? And he's like, yeah.
I know, I
mean,
appreciate
that kid,
it.
dude, there's no more support than canceling his plans and showing up.
Yeah, I mean, when Ben calls, I show up. I mean, look, I wear a lot of different hats, but to me, this one, it gets into the core of why we're here. I mean, it gets into all those things that keep me up at night. And especially, like I said, coming from the background that I come from in my family tree, to understand and be able to put down genetic disorder, genetic trauma, so that the next generation won't be affected the way that I've watched people in my family affected, I can't think of anything that's more important. Yeah. So you can take everything else that I do, and you can put it over there on the nightstand, and this is of the utmost importance to me. And it's just, I mean, how can you not get obsessed with this? I mean, with the possibilities. I mean,
It's a fun rabbit hole.
it's yeah. I mean, my brain is susceptible to rabbit holes, and to me, this is the ultimate one.
I love that. So, what future do you see with the company? Because you were joking earlier, but like, would you ever join the company in an official capacity?
I mean, listen.
I love this. This is on the spot. Well, so wait. So shout out to one of our friends, Michael Doherty.
Yeah, Michael
right?
Doherty, yes.
Who did Godzilla, King of the Monsters, many other things. Very famous, insanely smart, like Joe. I got introduced to Mike, and I was like, hey, come out, like, do some stuff. Did some stuff. I was like, hey, I know you direct movies. You should direct some content for kids. It kind of worked. And now Mike's splitting half of his time with us, right? And so, Joe, would you spend more time with Colossal if you had more time?
Yes, Ben. Let's talk about it after we get done.
I love that. Great. So, you know what? You can thank me for getting a job at Colossal, Joe. There you go.
Nice.
No, we are out of time, and I appreciate you guys so much for stopping by. This is amazing. Joe, I know, thank you for canceling your plans, but, hope this was worth your time.
I had nothing else to do.
I think you did. You seem like a busy man, but I appreciate it. Thanks so much. Give it up for these guys.
Thank you.